When I turned 16, I started the graduated licensing program that same week. I couldn't wait for the freedom that would come with being able to get behind the wheel of a car and just go. It was a day of celebration when I could finally drive without a parent sitting beside me. And now, to explain, I grew up, every house I lived in growing up with my family, we lived outside the city limits. And that meant that getting anywhere meant driving. Oftentimes it was even too far to ride a bike. And so we got used to needing to drive to see your friends. And once I got my license, I was off. As a relational extrovert, I get energy from people. So I was out as much as my parents would let me use a vehicle. I was out, I was about, I was seeing people. This one time, my friend Wes was hanging out at my house. He had got dropped off, and the plan was that I would drive him back home, and it was getting late. And so we left the house and climbed into our family's minivan so that I could give him a ride home. Now, during the time that we were inside talking and listening to music, the weather had gotten nasty, and the roads were slippery and icy. So we pulled out slowly and started on the trip. Now, getting there, I was extremely cautious. I had precious cargo with me, my friend Wes, and we made it to his house without mishap. And Wes got out of the car and started closing the door, but he stopped and he popped his head back in and he said, "Hey, drive safe, eh?" Famous last words. I pulled back out on the road and began making my way home. The roads were a sheet of ice, and snow had started falling, making visibility just a little bit more difficult. Now, there came a point on the road home where there was a bit of an S-curve. And as I started around the first bend, the back end of my van started to slide out. And I think I hit the brakes and tried to correct with the steering wheel. I'm not exactly sure what I did, but whatever I did, it was wrong. I did the wrong thing. And I put the van into a spin. So there I was, 360ing down the road until crash. I came to a dead stop. The van crumpled around a tree. With adrenaline pumping, I climbed out of the van and I started running through the snowy night, down icy roads toward my home. I think I was in a little bit of shock, but at least I could move. At least I could move. Eventually, I actually got picked up by a couple of teenagers. Their car was hotboxed. And in my shock and cold, I didn't care. I climbed in and they got me the rest of the way home without incident. I sheepishly woke up my parents and I told them what happened. And I thought that they were going to be mad. Instead, they expressed concern. Was I all right? How was I doing? They ensured that I was okay. And then my dad got up and he put on a coat and we drove back to the scene of the accident. Now, when we were turning homeward after he had checked things out, my dad gave me the keys and asked if I was good to drive. I took them, my heart beating in my throat, and I got behind the wheel and I cautiously drove home with the comforting presence of my dad beside me. You see, my dad knew that an event like that could easily create deep fear and apprehension of driving. And so he encouraged me to get back behind the wheel. And in the process, I was able to begin to work through the trauma of that crash event. It was out of parental love that my dad handed me the keys. Now, I most certainly didn't deserve the chance to drive immediately. Actually, if I was getting what I deserved, it probably would have meant a timeout from driving. I had just totaled the van. But in a heartfelt expression for what he thought was my best, he acted. Friends, this summer we're digging through the Beatitudes, that first part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. If you're interested in following along, I invite you to check out the journey so far on our website, pelhamfriends.ca. So for today, Matthew 5, verse 7 says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Now remember that the Greek word translated blessed is the word makarios, and on top of meaning blessed, it carries the connotations of our understanding of the word lucky, and it also means happy. So happy, lucky, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. In a sense, that snowy nighttime scene is simply one example of mercy. I did not receive what I deserved, a driving timeout. No, I received what I did not deserve, the chance to drive again immediately. Rooted in love, my dad acted for my best, not based on the consequences of my actions. Now this echoes a deep biblical theme of being shown mercy and showing mercy. This idea of mercy is a central theme of the scriptures. It comes to us throughout the pages of the Bible. And the idea is that God is so full of mercy that he does not give humanity what we deserve. Rather, he gives us what we do not deserve. Now, remember that image at the beginning of the biblical text of Adam and Eve rebelling against their creator king. In effect, they're saying no thanks to God's way of life. And they went their own way. And they went to grave consequences. And then we see, as the biblical narrative unfolds, it becomes clear that the characters throughout the narrative continue to echo this rebellious posture, to continually to reject God's way in order to go their own way. And like Adam and Eve, they face their own grave consequences. And all too often, we too choose to rebel against God's way of life, a life that we see revealed through the work and message of Jesus, in order to go our own ways. And friends, like all who have gone before us, we too often face grave consequences. The psalmist David reveals the sentiment of God's mercy when he pens in Psalm 25, verses 6 and 7. "Remember, Lord, your great mercy and love, for they are from of old. Do not remember the sins of my youth and my rebellious ways. According to your love, remember me, for you, Lord, are good." For you, Lord, are good. One of the big ideas that comes across in the Bible is that God is a God of love and mercy. He does not leave us to face the full extent of the grave consequences of our rebellion. No, he shows us mercy. And as the narrative unfolds, we see how God invites rebellious people to come and be embraced as his adopted children, to be heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. The mercy received is unimaginable. It truly is good news. Now, the implication of this is that for those who are known as the people of God, we are called to echo that mercy back to any that we have opportunity to interact with. Now, it is this theme that Jesus communicates when he told the story of the unmerciful servant. In the story, the king is settling accounts with his servants. One of them comes before him with an incredible debt, to which the king forgives entirely. He knows the man will never be able to repay it. And the man goes out in joy, but then he finds another man that owes him just a little bit, And even though that servant begs, the man has him thrown in jail. Now, when the king hears what happened, he had the man, the original man who was forgiven, arrested and thrown in jail himself. And then Jesus says, "This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother and sister from your heart." When you break down the debts in the story, the amounts interpreted in the kids' story that we watched a few minutes ago are pretty close. The debt the man had forgiven by the king would have been about 20 years worth of wages. And the debt that the man held against his fellow servant, well, that would have been just a few months worth of wages. And did you catch the depth of the king's mercy? The man hadn't asked for a complete forgiveness on the debt. That would have been an unimaginable request. He simply begged for time. Give me some time. Yet the king went above and beyond the request, and he canceled the whole debt. He said, "You're free, paid in full." And the man, even after receiving such mercy, he couldn't find it in himself to show even a little bit of mercy. His fellow servant also begged for just a little bit of time. He wasn't asking for the debt to be canceled. He merely asked for time. "Give me the time." Yet the man didn't bother to give any breathing room on the debt. Instead, he had him thrown in jail. And friends, that was his right. It was his right. As we mentioned last week, just because something is legal doesn't make it ethically right. And sometimes the context of an action shines particular perspective on the ethics of a situation. The king had a legal right to claim the man's life for indebted servitude, but he showed mercy. The man had a legal right to throw his fellow servant in jail for failing to pay, and he pushed those legal rights to the fullest extent of the law. It all stands as a striking reminder that God's mercy serves as a foundation for kingdom of God living. Because of his great mercy and love, we find our standing before God and among men. And standing on the foundation built by Christ, we are called to show mercy to others. We're invited to not give people what they deserve, but generously and graciously give them what they do not deserve. This all would have popped to Jesus' original hearers. You see, the religious leaders of Jesus' day tended to be merciless because of their demand for rigorous observance of the law. Although their desire was usually rooted, in a heart of devotion, they wanted to be pure and holy as God was holy. Yet it often became misguided, and their reactions to others ended up being inexcusable. Friends, the reality is unbending demands will always produce harsh condemnation towards those who don't measure up. And all too often, we don't measure up. Approaching this text from our perspective, reading it in 2020, we have the benefit of knowing more of the story, and seeing and understanding and experiencing Christ's mercy allows us to respond in gratitude. Our natural response can be one of mercy and forgiveness. We truly can forgive and give another chance. We can let people off the hook. We can do what is actually right and not push for our legal rights. Now, some of you may be saying, "John, you don't know my story. How can you be pushing me to that? How many times must I forgive? Do we simply forgive and show mercy one more time? You don't know what I've been through. You don't know. You don't understand." And you're right, friends. I don't fully know your story, and I don't know what each of you are navigating, but I do remember what Jesus called his disciples to. A standard in Jewish teaching is that forgiving 3 times was enough to show a merciful spirit. The idea was that repeat offenders may not be repenting at all. They may not mean it. So they limited their mercy and forgiveness. So when you ask if you need to forgive another time, the thought of limiting your mercy and forgiveness does have precedent. It does have precedent. So Peter comes to Jesus asking, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Now I'm sure Peter would have been feeling pretty good about himself. He wondered about going above and beyond what the standard Jewish expectation was. If the Jews expected 3 times, Peter said, well, what about 7? It's more than double what was usually prescribed. But Jesus wasn't playing. He answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Friends, while there may be a precedent for limiting how much mercy and forgiveness we show others, friends, please understand that this simply isn't the way of Jesus. For Jesus, the number doesn't matter. We are to continue to forgive without keeping count. And in the light of the story Jesus tells about the unmerciful servant, our response is rooted in the reality of our own forgiveness. We show mercy because we first received mercy. It's important at this stage to return to a thought. Remember that Jesus isn't talking to the crowds. He's talking to the disciples. Crowds want to be entertained. Crowds want to have an easy and exciting teaching, something that tickles their ears. However, disciples recognize the call of a rabbi requires sacrifice. It requires a change of values to let go of what we hold dearly to in order to embrace the way of the rabbi. A way rooted in Jesus' very own life. So, friends, when we experience God's merciful forgiveness towards our own rebellion, may we feel such an overwhelming gratitude and a deeper understanding of forgiveness that we will in turn demonstrate that same mercy to others. This is the way of the kingdom. And Jesus said, Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy.